The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange hue over the marshlands outside Charleston. The hum of the car engine was the only sound in the tense silence that enveloped Rose and Ryder. Rose stared out the window, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat, feeling the weight of the argument simmering between them. Ryder's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched tightly as if holding back words that threatened to spill out. "This isn't a conversation we can keep avoiding, Rose." Ryder finally broke the silence, his voice sharp and cutting. "You're being unreasonable. The villa is just a house. What good is it to you if it's stuck in your name when I can make it work for us?" Rose turned to him, the anger and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface. "It's not just a house," she said, her voice shaking. "It's my family's legacy. It's the only piece of them I have left. How can you not understand that?" Ryder let out a bitter laugh. "Your family's legacy won't pay the bills, Rose. I'm trying to help us, to help you, and you're too stubborn to see it." Rose felt her chest tighten, a familiar pang of guilt mixed with frustration. She had heard this argument too many times before, but tonight it felt different, darker, heavier, like Ryder wasn't just trying to convince her. He was trying to break her resolve. "You're not helping me," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. "You're helping yourself. I've seen the late nights, the evasive answers. I know something's wrong, Ryder. This isn't about the house. This is about control." The car swerved slightly as Ryder's grip on the wheel tightened further. He didn't respond at first, his silence more ominous than his words. The tension in the car grew unbearable, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, he pulled the car to an abrupt stop on the side of the deserted road. Rose was thrown forward slightly, the seatbelt digging into her chest. The sudden stillness felt deafening as Ryder turned to face her, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and desperation. "Get out," he said, his voice low and menacing. Rose froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her mind scrambling to process his words. "I said, get out of the car," Ryder repeated, louder this time, his voice echoing in the quiet marsh. "If you won't see reason, if you won't listen to me, then figure out your own way home." For a moment, Rose thought she must be imagining things. This was Ryder, her husband of 6 years, the man who had once promised to protect and cherish her. And yet, she couldn't recognize the person sitting across from her now. He was a stranger, someone cold and unfeeling. Her hands trembled as she unbuckled her seatbelt, her movements mechanical as if her body had taken over while her mind reeled. She stepped out of the car onto the gravel shoulder, her legs shaky beneath her. Ryder didn't wait. As soon as the door closed behind her, he slammed the car into gear and sped off, the taillights disappearing into the horizon. Rose stood there, frozen in place, her mind blank except for the overwhelming realization. She was alone. The distant hum of Ryder's car engine faded into the stillness of the marshlands, leaving Rose standing in a void of silence. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she took an unsteady step forward, wrapping her arms around herself against the encroaching evening chill. Her breaths came shallow and uneven, the reality of what had just happened pressing down on her like a crushing weight. She glanced around, hoping for a sign of another car, another person, anything. The stretch of road ahead and behind was empty, flanked by shadowy marsh grasses swaying gently in the breeze. The sky, once a soft orange, had deepened into twilight, and with it came the growing whispers of night. Somewhere in the distance, the guttural call of a heron echoed, a reminder of how isolated she was. Rose's chest tightened, panic threatening to claw its way to the surface. She reached for her phone, only to remember Ryder had insisted on holding it during their earlier argument, claiming he didn't want her distracted while they talked things through. Her pulse quickened as she realized she had no way to call for help, no way to let anyone know where she was. Pushing down the rising fear, she forced herself to move. Standing still would only make her a target for whatever or whoever might appear in the dark. The road stretched on endlessly, each step echoing in the quiet night as she walked, her mind racing with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How had things come to this? When had Ryder turned into someone capable of abandoning her like this? As her thoughts spiraled, she found herself replaying moments from their marriage, the good and the bad. She thought about the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had charmed her with his wit and passion during a chance meeting at a coffee shop. They had talked for hours that day, sharing dreams and aspirations, envisioning a future full of promise. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had shifted, and so had Ryder. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, breaking her reverie. Relief flooded through her, but it was quickly replaced by apprehension. What if it wasn't someone safe? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she knew she couldn't afford to miss this chance. As the car approached, she stepped cautiously to the side of the road, waving her arms. The vehicle slowed, its brakes squealing slightly as it came to a stop beside her. The passenger window rolled down, revealing an older woman with kind eyes framed by wisps of silver hair. She leaned forward, concern etched across her face. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, her voice soft and steady. "What on earth are you doing out here alone at this hour?" Rose hesitated, her instincts clashing with her desperation. She took a step closer, peering into the car to see a man, likely the woman's husband, behind the wheel. His expression mirrored hers, worry tempered with curiosity. The warmth of their presence broke through her fear. Rose started, her voice cracking. "I had a fight with my husband. He left me here." The woman's eyes widened, and she exchanged a glance with her husband before reaching over to unlock the door. "Get in, sweetheart. It's not safe out here." Rose didn't need further encouragement. She climbed into the back seat, the leather cool against her skin as she sank into it. The couple introduced themselves as Linda and Bob, retirees from a nearby town who'd been out for a late drive to enjoy the marshland views. As Bob pulled the car back onto the road, Linda turned in her seat to face Rose. "You poor thing. Do you have a place to go? We can take you wherever you need." Rose hesitated, unsure of where to direct them. Going home was out of the question. Ryder would be there, and the thought of facing him now made her stomach churn. Finally, she gave them the address of her best friend, Corey. It felt like the only safe place she could go. For the rest of the ride, Linda kept up a gentle stream of conversation, asking light questions and sharing stories about her grandchildren. Rose was grateful for the distraction, the normalcy of it anchoring her frayed nerves. By the time they pulled into Corey's driveway, the initial shock of the evening had dulled, replaced by a simmering anger and a quiet resolve. Linda squeezed Rose's hand as she stepped out of the car. "Take care of yourself, dear, and don't let him get away with this." Rose nodded, the woman's words echoing in her mind as she turned toward the house. The porch light flickered on as Corey opened the door, her expression shifting from surprise to concern when she saw Rose's disheveled state. "Rose, what happened?" Corey asked, pulling her inside without waiting for an answer. As Rose stepped into the warm embrace of her friend's home, she felt the walls of her composure begin to crack. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time that evening, she allowed herself to break. Corey held her tightly, murmuring reassurances as Rose sobbed into her shoulder. "I'll help you," Corey said firmly when Rose finally managed to explain what had happened. "Whatever Ryder's trying to pull, we'll make sure he doesn't get away with it." Rose wiped her eyes, the weight of the evening pressing down on her shoulders. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion and heartache, a flicker of determination began to stir. Ryder may have left her stranded, but she wasn't going to let him take anything more from her. Not her home, not her pride, and certainly not her future. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of Corey's living room, casting warm streaks across the hardwood floor. Rose sat curled up on the couch, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in her hands. She stared into the dark liquid, her mind replaying the events of the previous night like a broken record. The humiliation of Ryder's betrayal burned deeply, but beneath it simmered a quiet anger that felt unfamiliar and strangely empowering. Across the room, Corey stood by the kitchen counter, flipping through a legal pad filled with notes. Her usual air of calm confidence was tinged with urgency as she jotted down thoughts and murmured to herself. Corey had always been the fixer, the one Rose turned to in moments of crisis, and today was no exception. Corey finally looked up, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. "All right," she said, her tone brisk but gentle. "We need to start with the basics. First, I'll file for a freeze on your joint accounts. If Ryder's trying to drain them, we can stop him before he gets too far." Rose blinked, processing her words. "Do you think he would—" She trailed off, already knowing the answer. "Yes," Corey replied bluntly. "Based on what you told me about last night and everything that's led up to it, he's already made his move. But don't worry, we'll get ahead of him." Rose nodded, a small wave of relief washing over her. Corey's confidence had always been a source of comfort, and right now it felt like the anchor she desperately needed. "What else do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steadier than it had been hours ago. Corey leaned against the counter, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "I'll need to contact someone who can help us dig deeper. Ryder's been hiding things, money for starters, but I'm betting there's more to uncover. I know just the person for the job." Rose tilted her head, curiosity flickering through the haze of her emotions. "Who?" "Sky," Corey said simply. "He's a private investigator. We've worked together on a few cases before, and if there's something to find, he'll find it." The name struck a faint chord of recognition, but Rose couldn't place it. "Do you trust him?" she asked. "With my life," Corey replied without hesitation. "And more importantly, I trust him with yours." Rose hesitated, the idea of involving a stranger in her deeply personal troubles feeling daunting. But the thought of confronting Ryder, or his schemes, alone was far more terrifying. "All right," she agreed quietly. "Let's do it." Corey smiled, the warmth in her expression softening her otherwise resolute demeanor. "Good. We'll make the call after breakfast." For the first time in what felt like days, Rose allowed herself a small bite of hope. While she still felt the sting of Ryder's actions, the idea of taking action, of not letting him win, sparked a determination she hadn't felt in years. By mid-morning, Corey's living room had transformed into a makeshift war room. Papers were spread across the coffee table, bank statements, old financial documents, and a few blurry photos of the villa from Rose's phone. Corey sat cross-legged on the floor, her phone pressed to her ear as she waited for Sky to pick up. Rose hovered nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Sky," Corey said, her tone shifting into one of brisk familiarity as the call connected. "It's Corey. I have a case for you. Personal and urgent." Rose strained to hear the response, but the voice on the other end was too muffled. Corey's expression, however, softened slightly, a small reassurance that Sky was taking the matter seriously. "Yes, it's a financial dispute, but it's deeper than that," Corey continued. "Rose needs help uncovering what her husband's been up to. Can you come by later today? I'll fill you in on the details." After a few more minutes of back and forth, Corey hung up, turning her attention to Rose. He'll be here around 2. Sky's thorough, but I'll warn you, he doesn't sugarcoat things. If Ryder's hiding something, Sky will dig it up, but it might not be easy to hear. Rose nodded, her stomach churning with a mix of anticipation and dread. I just want the truth, she said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Corey smiled faintly. Good, that's the first step. Now let's talk strategy. Over the next few hours, Corey walked Rose through the initial steps to protect herself legally and financially. They filed the paperwork to freeze the joint accounts, flagged her villa's deed to prevent unauthorized sales, and drafted a preliminary plan to document Ryder's behavior. Rose's head spun with the sheer volume of information, but each task completed brought a small sense of control back into her grasp. Shortly before 2, the doorbell rang. Corey glanced at Rose, who suddenly felt a knot tighten in her chest. That'll be Sky, Corey said, rising to answer the door. When Corey returned, a tall man with dark, neatly trimmed hair and a calm but sharp demeanor followed her into the room. He had the kind of presence that immediately commanded attention, not imposing but quietly confident. His grey jacket and professional air suggested someone who took his work seriously. Sky, this is Rose, Corey said, introducing them. Rose, meet Sky Lawson, the best investigator I've worked with. Sky extended a hand, his gaze steady. Pleasure to meet you, he said in a tone that was polite but businesslike. Rose shook his hand, feeling a flicker of unease under his assessing eyes. Thank you for helping with this, she said softly. Sky nodded and gestured to the papers scattered across the coffee table. Let's get started. Why don't you tell me everything you know about Ryder's recent behavior? The more details, the better. As Rose began recounting the months leading up to the night Ryder abandoned her, she felt a strange mix of vulnerability and relief. Sky listened intently, his questions precise and pointed, probing deeper into things she hadn't thought were significant. By the time they finished, the weight in Rose's chest had shifted. Not lighter, but different. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Sky leaned back, studying his notes. It's clear Ryder's been planning this for a while, he said matter-of-factly. The sudden push for the villa, the missing money, it all lines up. But I'll need more time to dig into the accounts and cross-reference any property records. Corey placed a reassuring hand on Rose's shoulder. We're on it, Rose. Sky and I will make sure Ryder doesn't get away with this. For the first time since the ordeal began, Rose felt a flicker of confidence. They had a plan, and she had allies. Whatever Ryder was hiding, she would uncover it, and she wouldn't let him take another piece of her life. Rose sat in Corey's living room the next day, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sweater as Sky and Chloe huddled around a laptop on the coffee table. The air was thick with focus, punctuated only by the soft clicks of the keyboard and the occasional murmurs of Sky directing Chloe to specific files or links. It was strange watching them work, Sky with his calm precision, and Chloe, younger and far more animated, her energy almost palpable as her hands darted over the keys. You said Ryder started pushing about the villa around 3 months ago, Sky asked, not looking up from the screen. Rose nodded, her throat tightening. Yes. At first it was subtle, little comments about how we could make better use of it, or how it was wasted, sitting empty most of the year, but then he got persistent. Chloe let out a soft hum of disapproval as she flipped through a set of bank statements on her laptop. Persistent is putting it lightly. He's been funneling money out of your joint account for at least 6 months. Look here. She tilted the screen toward Rose and Sky. Small transfers, nothing huge, just enough to fly under the radar, but they add up. Sky leaned closer, his brow furrowing. These accounts, where do they lead? Chloe pulled up a new window, typing rapidly. Looks like offshore holdings. Belize, specifically. This isn't just casual embezzlement. This is deliberate. He's been hiding assets. Rose's stomach dropped. She had suspected Ryder was keeping secrets, but seeing the evidence laid bare was something else entirely. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It means," Skye said evenly, "he's been planning to move that money somewhere he thinks we can't trace it. But he's not as clever as he thinks. Offshore accounts aren't untouchable, just inconvenient." Chloe smirked, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Especially for me. I'll need some time, but I can start digging into these transactions, see where the money trails go." Corey entered the room, carrying a tray of coffee mugs, her expression tense but composed. "What are we looking at?" she asked, setting the tray down. Skye filled her in on the offshore accounts, his voice steady but with an undertone of urgency. Corey listened intently, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This just keeps getting better," she said dryly. "Anything else?" "Not yet," Skye replied. "But Ryder's actions suggest he's desperate. If we keep pressing, he'll make a mistake. Desperate people always do." Rose wrapped her hands around one of the mugs, the warmth grounding her as her mind raced. "Do you think Melissa is involved in this?" she asked suddenly, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. Chloe and Skye exchanged a glance before Skye nodded. "It's likely. If Ryder is trying to siphon money out of your life, Melissa could be the reason. People don't do this alone. They need an accomplice, and she fits the profile." Rose felt the weight of their words settle over her. Ryder's betrayal was one thing, but the idea that someone else, a stranger, was actively working to ruin her life made the anger in her chest burn hotter. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't just hurt. She was ready to fight. Rose straightened in her seat, her hands tightening around the coffee mug. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice firmer now, the initial shock giving way to resolve. Skye leaned back, his analytical gaze fixed on her. "We keep digging. If Melissa's tied to this, there'll be a connection. Chloe can look for any communications between them, emails, calls, shared transactions. Meanwhile, I'll start cross-referencing Ryder's recent activities with property records. If he's planning something big, like selling your villa, there'll be paperwork or preliminary inquiries somewhere." "Won't he notice?" Rose asked, her mind spinning with the possibilities. "If we start poking around in his business, won't he realize and try to cover his tracks?" Skye gave her a faint smile. "That's the idea. Pressure makes people slip up. If he's hiding something, and he is, he'll start scrambling. The more frantic he gets, the more mistakes he'll make. We just have to be ready to catch them." Chloe chimed in, her fingers still moving over the keyboard. "Speaking of catching things, I think I just found something interesting." She spun the laptop around to face the group. On the screen was a calendar entry tied to one of Ryder's accounts. "It looks like he's meeting someone tomorrow evening. A place called the Harbour Club. Swanky little private spot downtown." Corey's eyes narrowed as she studied the screen. "Melissa?" "Could be," Chloe replied. "The event is vague, just listed as dinner. But if he's meeting someone important, it's worth checking out." Skye nodded, already formulating a plan. "I'll handle it. Ryder doesn't know me, so I can keep an eye on things without raising suspicion." Rose hesitated, her gaze flickering between Corey and Skye. "What if he sees you? What if he figures out what we're doing?" Skye's calm expression didn't falter. "I won't let that happen. I've done this before. The goal isn't confrontation, just observation. If Melissa shows up or anyone else we don't recognize, I'll get the information we need." Corey placed a reassuring hand on Rose's shoulder. "Trust him, Rose. He's good at this." Taking a deep breath, Rose nodded. "Okay, just be careful." Skye gave her a small nod before turning back to the papers on the table. "In the meantime, Chloe, focus on those offshore accounts. The more we know about Ryder's movements, the better prepared we'll be. Chloe grinned, her confidence contagious. Already on it. As the day wore on, Rose felt the tension in her chest shift from helplessness to determination. Each piece of information they uncovered, each step closer to exposing Ryder, felt like reclaiming a part of herself he had tried to take. For the first time in months, she wasn't just reacting to what Ryder did, she was fighting back. When Sky left later that evening to prepare for his observation at the Harbour Club, Rose found herself lingering in the living room with Corey. The two women sat in a companionable silence for a moment before Corey spoke. "You're handling this better than I expected," she said, her tone light but sincere. "A lot of people would have crumbled under what you've been through." Rose shrugged, her fingers brushing against the edge of the legal pad on the table. "I don't feel like I'm handling it. Most of the time I'm just angry and scared." Corey's gaze softened. "That's normal, but you're still standing, Rose. That counts for a lot." Rose met her friend's eyes, the weight of the compliment settling in her chest. "Thanks, Corey, for everything. I couldn't do this without you." Corey smiled. "That's what friends are for. And remember, this isn't just about stopping Ryder. It's about taking your life back. Don't let him take any more of your power." Rose nodded, her determination hardening. Tomorrow, Sky would get answers, and with them, she would take another step closer to breaking free from Ryder's hold. Whatever came next, she was ready. The villa felt different as Rose stepped inside the next afternoon, her steps echoing in the eerily empty halls. The light streaming through the tall windows fell on bare walls, revealing faint outlines where picture frames once hung. The familiar warmth of her family home was gone, replaced by an unsettling hollowness that mirrored how she felt inside. Each room she entered carried a new wave of loss, but underneath it, her anger simmered, steady and unrelenting. Corey followed closely behind, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the stripped-down interior. "He didn't just take things," Corey said, running her hand over the empty mantel above the fireplace. "He took memories." Rose nodded silently, her throat tight as she tried to suppress the ache in her chest. Her family's photographs, the antique furniture her mother had painstakingly restored, even the small trinkets that once filled the shelves, all gone. Ryder hadn't just invaded her space, he had tried to erase her connection to it. "This must have taken planning," Corey continued, her voice sharp with anger. "You don't empty a house like this overnight." Rose turned to her, the realization hitting her like a cold slap. "He did this while I was away," she said, her voice trembling. "He knew I'd be with you last week. He planned it." Corey's jaw tightened. "And it means he's not working alone. Movers, logistics, someone helped him pull this off." Before Rose could respond, Sky's voice came from the doorway. "And that someone might be Melissa." They both turned to see him standing just inside the threshold, a file in his hand and a grim look on his face. "I checked out the dinner last night," he said, stepping further into the room. Melissa was there. She and Ryder spent the entire evening in a corner booth, whispering like conspirators. No doubt in my mind she's involved. Rose felt a fresh wave of anger flare up. Melissa. The name alone was enough to set her teeth on edge, and now this woman wasn't just someone in Ryder's life. She was actively helping him destroy hers. "Did you get anything else?" Corey asked, her lawyer's mind already shifting gears. Sky nodded, handing over the file. "Financial records tied to Melissa's real estate firm. Ryder's been funneling money through her accounts to cover expenses for the villa's clearing. I also found a few encrypted documents I'm still working to crack, but it's clear they're planning something bigger." Rose's grip tightened on the edge of the kitchen counter. "What could be bigger than stealing everything out of my home?" "Selling it," Sky replied bluntly, "without your consent. My guess is they're laying the groundwork to flip the property. That villa isn't just valuable, it's a gold mine in this area. They're betting you won't catch on until it's too late. The words sent a chill through Rose, but they also ignited something stronger. Determination. "They're wrong," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "They think they can take everything from me, but they won't." Sky met her gaze, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good, because now it's our turn to make a move." Corey flipped through the documents Sky had handed her, her sharp eyes scanning for anything actionable. If they're planning to sell the villa, they'll need legal groundwork. Contracts, appraisals, maybe even back-channel communications with potential buyers. If we can intercept any of that, we can shut it down before they get too far. "Easier said than done," Sky said, his tone measured. "Ryder's been careful so far, and Melissa knows how to cover her tracks. But she's not perfect. Last night I noticed she was nervous, constantly checking her phone. If we can figure out who she's been talking to, it might lead us to something concrete." Chloe's voice cut through the conversation as she entered the villa with her laptop under one arm. "I might already have a lead on that," she said, dropping into one of the remaining chairs and opening her laptop. "I've been tracking Melissa's digital footprint since last night. Guess what? She's been in contact with a property developer, Jackson Harper." Corey raised an eyebrow. "Harper? He's known for buying up high-value properties in this area. If Melissa's dealing with him, they're moving fast." Chloe nodded. "Exactly. And it gets better. He's scheduled to meet her at a real estate conference in Savannah tomorrow. If this is about the villa, they'll likely finalize their plans there." Sky glanced at Rose, his expression thoughtful. "If we intercept them at that conference, we might be able to confirm their intentions and stop them before they can move forward." Rose hesitated, her hands clenching into fists. The thought of facing Ryder or Melissa again made her stomach churn, but she knew there was no other choice. If they were going to protect her home, they had to act decisively. "What's the plan?" she asked, forcing the fear in her voice to the back of her mind. Sky nodded approvingly, clearly expecting her question. "First, we'll need to track Melissa's schedule and make sure Harper will actually show. Chloe, that's your job. Corey and I will prepare the legal groundwork. If we can document evidence of them trying to sell the villa without your consent, we can hit them with everything we've got. Rose, you'll come with me." "Me?" Rose blinked, caught off guard. "Why do I need to be there?" Sky's tone softened, but his words carried weight. "Because this is your fight. You don't have to confront them directly, but being there might give us an edge. People make mistakes when they're under pressure, and your presence could rattle them enough to slip up." Rose swallowed hard, the enormity of the task settling on her shoulders. But as she looked around at Corey, Sky, and Chloe, all of them working tirelessly on her behalf, she felt a flicker of courage ignite. She wasn't alone in this. She had allies, people who believed in her and her fight. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady. "Let's do it." Corey smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Good, because once we have what we need, Ryder and Melissa won't see what's coming." As they finalized the details of their plan, the villa no longer felt empty. It felt like a battlefield, a place where Rose's determination and the support of her friends would turn the tide. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time she felt ready to face whatever came next. The drive to Savannah the next morning was quiet, but charged with anticipation. Rose sat in the passenger seat of Sky's car, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The passing scenery blurred together, her focus entirely on what lay ahead. Her thoughts spiraled through the countless ways the upcoming confrontation could go wrong, but she forced herself to breathe steadily, drawing strength from the calm energy radiating from Sky. "We'll be fine," Sky said, breaking the silence as though sensing her unease. His hands were steady on the wheel, his tone reassuring. This isn't about causing a scene or confronting them outright. Our goal is to observe, gather information, and if we can, document something useful. That's it? Rose nodded, though her chest still felt heavy. What if they see us? What if they know what we're doing? Skye glanced at her briefly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then we adapt. But trust me, they won't see us coming. People like Ryder and Melissa, they think they're untouchable. That arrogance will work in our favor. His confidence steadied her nerves, if only slightly. As the cityscape of Savannah came into view, Rose straightened in her seat, the familiar knot of determination tightening in her chest. She had spent too long being passive, letting Ryder dictate her life. Today, she would take a step forward, not just to protect her home, but to reclaim her power. They parked a few blocks away from the conference venue, a sleek modern building flanked by glass walls and surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges. The parking lot was dotted with high-end cars, a testament to the wealth of those attending. Skye led the way, his stride purposeful but unhurried, as though they were simply another pair of attendees blending into the crowd. Inside, the air buzzed with the hum of conversation and the faint clinking of glassware from a nearby refreshment table. Professionals in tailored suits and polished dresses milled about, exchanging business cards and pleasantries. Rose's eyes darted across the room, searching for Ryder or Melissa, but the sea of unfamiliar faces made it difficult to focus. Skye leaned in, his voice low. "Stay close. Let me do the scanning. If they're here, we'll find them." Rose nodded, her heart pounding as they wove through the crowd. Skye moved with practiced ease, his sharp gaze scanning every corner of the room. After a few minutes, he nudged Rose gently and inclined his head toward the far end of the space. There, near a cluster of chairs arranged in a semicircle, stood Melissa. She was dressed impeccably, her sleek black dress and confident stance making her stand out even in this well-dressed crowd. Ryder was beside her, his hand resting casually on the back of her chair as they engaged in a hushed conversation with a tall, grey-haired man who could only be Jackson Harper. Skye's expression hardened. That's them. Let's position ourselves nearby, but out of sight. Rose followed his lead, her nerves electric as they settled at a table a few feet away, partially obscured by a decorative partition. From this vantage point, they could hear fragments of the conversation, just enough to catch mentions of property values and expedited timelines. It was exactly what they'd suspected. Ryder and Melissa were pushing to sell the villa, and Harper was their buyer. Rose strained to hear more of the conversation, her pulse quickening with every word that drifted toward their hiding spot. Melissa's voice was smooth and confident, dripping with charm as she pitched the villa to Jackson Harper. "It's a prime piece of property," Melissa said, her tone almost rehearsed. "Historic value, oceanfront views, and plenty of potential for development. You'd be hard-pressed to find something comparable." Ryder chimed in, his voice low but clear. "We can have everything squared away within the week. The current complications won't be an issue." Skye's jaw tightened at Ryder's words, his focus unrelenting as he held up his phone, angling it discreetly to capture the scene. Rose's hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Every instinct told her to march over and confront them, but Skye's steady presence beside her anchored her in place. "Patience," he whispered, sensing her tension. "We need more." As if on cue, Harper leaned forward, his voice taking on a note of skepticism. "I'll need assurances that everything is legally sound before I move forward. I don't do business with unresolved ownership disputes." Melissa flashed a confident smile, brushing off his concerns with practiced ease. "It's already handled. The current owner isn't in a position to contest. By the time the paperwork is signed, the property will be entirely yours." The blood drained from Rose's face. The ease with which Melissa dismissed her existence as not in a position to contest was infuriating and terrifying. But it was Ryder's next words that sent a chill down her spine. "She doesn't have the resources to fight us," Ryder said smoothly. "By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." Rose's hands trembled, her nails digging into the wood of the table. The audacity, the sheer cruelty of his words made her stomach churn. This wasn't just about the villa anymore. It was about how little Ryder thought of her, how easily he had dismissed her as a non-factor in her own life. Skye gently placed a hand on her arm, grounding her before she could react. "We've got what we need," he murmured. "Let's move before they notice us." Rose nodded, her body tense as she followed Skye's lead. They slipped away from the table, weaving through the crowd until they were back outside, the crisp savannah air hitting her like a wave. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself, but her hands still shook with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Skye lowered his phone, reviewing the footage he'd captured. "This is good," he said, his tone calm but determined. "We've got their conversation on record. Clear evidence of intent to sell the villa without your consent. That'll go a long way in court." Rose turned to him, her eyes blazing. "It's not enough," she said, her voice steadier now. "I want them to feel what they've done to me. Ryder, Melissa, both of them. I'm not just going to stop them. I'm going to make sure they regret ever trying to take what's mine." Skye's expression softened, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. "Then let's make it happen," he said simply. As they headed back to the car, Rose's resolve solidified. This wasn't just about saving the villa anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, piece by piece, from the people who thought they could take it away. She didn't know exactly what the next steps would be, but for the first time in weeks, she felt powerful, and she wasn't about to let that feeling go. Rose sat at the kitchen table in Corey's house the next morning, a notebook open in front of her. Scrawled across the pages were notes from the previous day, snippets of Ryder and Melissa's conversation, the details Skye had managed to record, and the beginnings of a plan. Her pen hovered over the paper, but her mind raced too fast to focus on writing. Corey entered the room, her phone in hand, and dropped a thick folder onto the table. "That's everything we've got on Ryder and Melissa so far," she said, sliding into the chair across from Rose. "Financial records, email traces Chloe dug up, and the video Skye recorded. It's more than enough to show intent." Rose nodded, flipping through the folder. The evidence was damning. Offshore account details, encrypted files that Chloe had partially cracked, and the incriminating footage from the conference. But as much as it satisfied her to see their web of lies unraveled, she knew this wasn't just about facts. It was about sending a message. "Do you think this will be enough?" Rose asked, looking up at Corey. "It's strong," Corey replied, her tone measured. "Legally, Ryder and Melissa are skating on thin ice. If they go through with the sale, we can stop them. But the fight isn't just in court, Rose. This is about strategy, making sure they know we're coming for them before they make their next move." Rose exhaled sharply, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "And if they try to push back? Ryder thinks I'm weak, someone who won't fight." Corey smiled faintly, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Then it's time to prove him wrong. You're not the same person he walked out on, Rose. You have the upper hand now, and he doesn't even know it." Before Rose could respond, Skye entered the room, his presence steady and grounding. He carried his laptop and a cup of coffee, setting both on the table. "I have news," he said, pulling up a document on his screen. "Chloe finished tracing Melissa's connections. Turns out Harper isn't the only potential buyer they've approached. There's a second one, someone named James Connors, another developer with deep pockets." Corey frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Connors. He's known for snapping up undervalued properties and flipping them fast. If they've brought him in, they're trying to create a bidding war. Rose's chest tightened. How does that change things? It means they're accelerating their timeline, Sky said grimly. They're betting that one of these buyers will commit before you can legally intervene. We don't have the luxury of waiting anymore. We need to make a preemptive move. Rose set her notebook aside, leaning forward with a newfound determination. What do we do? Sky's gaze met hers, steady and reassuring. We go after Melissa. She's the weaker link in this. Ryder's calculated, but she's impulsive. If we apply the right pressure, she'll crack, and when she does, she'll bring Ryder down with her. The room fell into a charged silence as the weight of the plan settled over them. Rose's heart pounded in her chest, but for the first time it wasn't fear driving her. It was resolve. Let's do it, she said firmly. Sky leaned back, tapping a rhythm on the edge of his laptop as he outlined the next steps. Melissa thrives on control, on looking untouchable. If we shake that image, make her believe the walls are closing in, she'll panic. And when people like her panic, they make mistakes. Corey nodded thoughtfully. We need to approach this from two angles. Legally, we continue building our case, but personally, we make her feel vulnerable. She's been operating under the assumption that Rose is too passive to fight back. Let's show her she's wrong. Rose listened intently. Her nerves coiled tight, but her determination held steady. What exactly does that mean? How do we make her feel vulnerable? Sky smirked faintly, a gleam of strategy in his eyes. We start by letting her know we're watching. A calculated move, something that lets her see the evidence we've gathered, but doesn't expose our full hand. It'll rattle her, make her second-guess Ryder's assurances that they're safe. Corey chimed in. An anonymous delivery, copies of the documents Chloe traced, the financial records, the offshore accounts, include enough to spook her, but not so much that she knows exactly what we have. Rose swallowed hard, the plan taking shape in her mind. And then what? Won't Ryder just calm her down and keep her on track? Sky shook his head. That's the beauty of it. People like Melissa don't handle uncertainty well, and Ryder's overconfidence will only make it worse. If she feels like he's underestimating the threat, it'll drive a wedge between them. Once they start slipping, we'll be ready to push. Rose glanced at the folder on the table, her fingers brushing over the edge of the incriminating documents. The thought of confronting Melissa, even indirectly, made her stomach twist, but the fire in her chest burned brighter. This wasn't just about protecting the villa anymore. It was about showing Ryder and Melissa that she wasn't the woman they thought they could trample over. I'll deliver the documents, Rose said suddenly, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. Sky and Corey exchanged a glance, surprise flickering across their faces. Are you sure? Corey asked, her tone cautious. We can find another way. No, Rose interrupted, her jaw tightening. This is my fight. If Melissa's going to feel the pressure, it needs to come from me. She needs to know I'm not afraid of her. Sky studied her for a moment before nodding. All right. But you won't be going alone. I'll shadow you just in case. Melissa might not suspect anything, but Ryder could be unpredictable. Rose nodded, relief and determination warring in her chest. When do we do it? Tonight, Sky replied. The sooner we move, the less time they have to adjust. Chloe's already preparing the package. Once we're ready, we'll head to her office. As the plan solidified, Rose felt a surge of energy coursing through her. It was a dangerous move, but she wasn't the same woman Ryder had left on the side of the road. She was stronger now, and she wasn't going to let him or Melissa win. Not this time. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Rose stood in the dim glow of Corey's porch light, clutching the envelope of documents tightly in her hands. Sky's car idled nearby, waiting to take her to the next step in reclaiming her life. With a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and walked toward the car, ready to face whatever came next. The streets were quiet as Sky's car rolled to a stop outside the sleek, glass-fronted office building where Melissa worked. The city lights reflected off the mirrored windows, casting long shadows onto the sidewalk. Rose tightened her grip on the envelope in her lap, her palms damp despite the cool air from the car's AC. She glanced at Sky, who sat in the driver's seat, scanning the building with the calm focus she had come to rely on. "You ready?" he asked, his tone low and steady. Rose nodded, though her heart hammered in her chest. "As ready as I'll ever be." Sky gave her an approving look. "You'll be fine. Walk in, drop the envelope at her desk and walk out. Don't linger, don't engage. If she's there, keep your cool. I'll be parked nearby in case anything goes wrong." Rose took a deep breath, pushing the door open and stepping into the crisp night air. The envelope felt heavier with each step as she crossed the empty street, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her. She reached the front entrance, the glass doors sliding open silently, and stepped into the brightly lit lobby. The receptionist desk was vacant, and the building hummed with a quiet stillness that made her footsteps sound louder than they were. She scanned the directory on the wall, finding Melissa's name and floor number. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime and Rose stepped inside, her reflection staring back at her from the polished interior. She squared her shoulders, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. The ride to Melissa's floor was both too quick and painfully slow. When the doors slid open, Rose found herself in a corridor lined with frosted glass doors, each bearing the name of a professional in bold, elegant lettering. Melissa's office was at the far end, her name etched neatly onto the glass. Light spilled out from the edges of the doorframe, and Rose's stomach tightened. She was here. Approaching the door, she heard faint movement inside, papers rustling, the soft click of a pen. Rose hesitated, the envelope trembling in her hands. She considered slipping it under the door and leaving, but something stopped her. Instead, she raised her hand and knocked lightly. The shuffling inside paused, and Melissa's voice called out, crisp and confident. "Come in." Rose's breath caught, but she pushed the door open, stepping into the office with deliberate calm. Melissa looked up from her desk, her expression flickering from surprise to something sharper. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Rose," Melissa said, leaning back in her chair, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What a surprise! What brings you here?" Rose held her ground, her heart racing as she placed the envelope on the desk between them. "This," she said evenly, her voice steadier than she expected. "Consider it a reminder that I'm not going anywhere." Melissa's smile faltered slightly, her eyes flicking down to the envelope. She didn't open it, but her hand hovered over it, her expression hardening. "I'm not sure what you think this is going to accomplish," she said coolly, "but it won't change anything." "We'll see," Rose replied, her voice firm. "Enjoy your evening, Melissa." Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and walked out, her heart pounding as she made her way back to the elevator. As the elevator doors closed, Rose exhaled sharply, her pulse still racing from the encounter. The air in the confined space felt heavy, and she forced herself to focus on steadying her breath. Melissa's reaction replayed in her mind, the fleeting surprise, the faint crack in her composure. For all her confidence, Melissa hadn't been expecting Rose to confront her, and that realization sent a small surge of satisfaction through Rose's chest. The elevator reached the ground floor with a soft chime, and Rose stepped out, her heels clicking against the marble floor of the lobby. Sky's car was parked across the street, his silhouette visible through the windshield. As soon as she climbed into the passenger seat, Sky glanced at her, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "How did it go?" he asked, pulling the car smoothly away from the curb. Rose leaned back in her seat, letting out a slow breath. "She wasn't expecting me. I left the envelope right in front of her. She tried to act like it didn't matter, but I could tell it shook her." Sky's lips quirked into a faint smile. Good. The goal wasn't to make her cave right away. It was to get inside her head. People like Melissa thrive on control. The second they feel it slipping, they start to unravel. Rose nodded, her thoughts still swirling. "She said it wouldn't change anything, but I don't believe her. Not after the way she looked at me." Sky's expression shifted, his smile fading into something more serious. "It's a start, but don't underestimate her or Ryder. They won't just sit back and wait for us to make the next move." The weight of his words settled over her, but instead of fear, Rose felt a flicker of determination. Melissa had been caught off guard tonight, and that was just the beginning. Whatever Ryder and Melissa thought they could take from her, she would make sure they paid for underestimating her. Back at Corey's house, the lights were still on, and the faint hum of conversation spilled into the night as Sky and Rose entered. Chloe sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop perched on her knees, while Corey stood by the kitchen counter with a mug of tea in her hand. They both looked up as Sky closed the door behind him. "How'd it go?" Corey asked, setting her mug down. Rose recounted the encounter, her words steady but charged with the energy of the moment. Corey's expression shifted from curiosity to approval, while Chloe smirked, clearly impressed. "Bold move," Chloe said, tapping a few keys on her laptop. "I like it. People like Melissa hate being confronted, especially by someone they think they've already beaten. She's probably pacing her office right now, wondering what else you know." "Let's hope she is," Corey said, her voice calm but sharp. "Because the more paranoid she gets, the more mistakes she'll make. And that's when we strike." Sky nodded, crossing his arms as he leaned against the wall. "Melissa's next steps will tell us everything we need to know. If she reaches out to Ryder or Harper tonight, Chloe can intercept the communication. Every move she makes from here is a potential opening." Rose met their gazes, her resolve strengthening with each word. The pieces were falling into place, but she knew the fight was far from over. They had rattled Melissa, but Ryder was still in the background, pulling the strings. If they wanted to win, they couldn't stop now. "Let's keep the pressure on," Rose said firmly. "Melissa made this personal, and I'm not backing down. Not until Ryder and she are both finished." The room fell into a determined silence, the weight of the task ahead heavy, but shared. For the first time, Rose felt the strength of the team surrounding her, and with it, the belief that she could see this through. The morning air was crisp as Rose sat at Corey's dining table, scrolling through her phone while sipping her coffee. The house was unusually quiet, with Chloe and Sky working in the study and Corey handling an early court appearance. Rose relished the stillness, though her mind churned with thoughts of Melissa and Ryder. She couldn't shake the memory of Melissa's expression the previous night. The faint crack in her composed facade had felt like a small victory, but Rose knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. The message was from Chloe. "Melissa just made a move. Come to the study." Setting her mug down, Rose rose quickly and made her way down the hall. Chloe and Sky were both seated at the desk, Chloe's fingers flying across the keyboard as lines of code and messages scrolled on her laptop screen. Sky stood behind her, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "What's going on?" Rose asked, her voice low but urgent. Chloe glanced up briefly, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "Melissa's spooked. She just sent an email to Ryder. Encrypted, but not well enough. I cracked it in minutes. Sky motioned for Rose to come closer. It's exactly what we were waiting for, he said. She's panicking, asking Ryder for a meeting. Apparently, she's not convinced the sale can go through without complications. She's worried about you. Rose's chest tightened, a mix of anger and satisfaction flooding her. When and where? She asked. Chloe smirked, her fingers still flying over the keys. Tonight, a private lounge downtown. She didn't specify the exact time, but I'm tracking her movements. We'll know when she leaves. Sky's voice was calm but focused. This is our chance to escalate. If Melissa is meeting Ryder, they'll be discussing the villa and how to counter us. We need to be there. Rose hesitated, her mind racing. The thought of confronting both Ryder and Melissa in a confined space was daunting, but it was also an opportunity she couldn't pass up. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Sky leaned forward, his tone measured. "We go in discreetly, just like at the conference. Listen, observe, and document. This isn't the time for a confrontation. We need evidence. If Ryder or Melissa so much as hint at their plans, we'll have them cornered." Rose nodded, the knot of determination tightening in her chest. "I'll be ready." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Chloe fine-tuned her surveillance tools, setting up a live feed to monitor Melissa's email and location, while Sky walked Rose through potential scenarios, ensuring she understood when to act and when to hold back. By the time evening rolled around, the weight of what they were about to do hung heavily over them. Rose found herself standing in front of the mirror in Corey's guest room, adjusting her jacket and staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed unfamiliar, calmer, more focused, but undeniably changed. She wasn't the person Ryder had abandoned on the side of the road. She was stronger now, and tonight she would prove it. The lounge was dimly lit and elegant, tucked away on the second floor of a historic downtown building. Sky and Rose entered separately, blending seamlessly into the small crowd of patrons. Soft jazz played in the background, and the quiet hum of conversation filled the room, creating an air of intimacy. Sky took a seat at the bar, positioning himself with a clear view of the private booths toward the back, while Rose found a spot near a potted palm, partially concealed but close enough to overhear. Chloe's voice buzzed faintly in Rose's ear through the tiny earpiece Sky had handed her before they arrived. "Melissa just parked. She's coming up now." Rose's stomach tightened, but she kept her face neutral, sipping from the glass of water she'd ordered. Moments later, Melissa entered the lounge, her presence unmistakable. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floor. She scanned the room briefly before heading toward one of the corner booths. Ryder arrived minutes later, his demeanor as controlled and self-assured as ever. He slid into the booth across from Melissa, his back to the room. Rose leaned forward slightly, her heart pounding as their conversation began. "I don't like this," Melissa said, her voice low but tinged with frustration. "You said she wouldn't be a problem. Now she's showing up at my office, leaving me cryptic threats. She knows something, Ryder." Ryder chuckled softly, his tone patronizing. "Relax, Melissa. She doesn't know anything. She's bluffing, trying to scare you." "She's not bluffing," Melissa snapped, her composure slipping. "That envelope had details about the offshore accounts. If she's digging that deep, it's only a matter of time before this entire thing blows up in our faces." Rose felt a flicker of satisfaction at Melissa's unease, but she forced herself to stay calm, her hands gripping her glass tightly. Sky glanced at her from the bar, a subtle nod encouraging her to remain composed. Ryder's voice lowered, his words harder to catch. Rose strained to hear, her pulse quickening as fragments of his response filtered through. "Focused on the sale. Legal battles take months. She won't have the resources to fight. Melissa shook her head, her frustration evident. We can't wait that long. Harper's already getting impatient, and Connors is sniffing around. If either of them pulls out, we're done. I won't go down with you, Ryder. Ryder leaned back, his expression calm but calculating. You won't. Let me handle Rose. You just focus on keeping Harper and Connors interested. Once the sale goes through, none of this will matter. The exchange sent a chill through Rose, but it also ignited her determination. They were confident, smug even, but they didn't know what she and her team were capable of. She glanced at Skye, who gave her a subtle signal to leave. They had heard enough. As Rose exited the lounge, her mind buzzed with the weight of what she'd just witnessed. Melissa was cracking under the pressure, and Ryder's overconfidence was leaving him vulnerable. They were close, so close, to exposing everything. Rose's steps quickened as she headed toward Skye's car parked a few blocks away, her resolve stronger than ever. Skye caught up with her, his expression unreadable but focused. We got what we needed, he said as they slid into the car. Melissa's panicking and Ryder's doubling down. That arrogance will cost him. Rose nodded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. We're going to stop them, Skye, no matter what it takes. As the car pulled away from the lounge, Rose stared out the window, her reflection a blur against the city lights. For the first time, she felt the faint stirrings of victory. They weren't just reacting anymore, they were setting the pace. Ryder and Melissa didn't know it yet, but the game was turning and Rose was ready to win. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as Rose sat at the plaintiff's table, her fingers tightly gripping a pen that rested idly on the legal pad in front of her. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she drew strength from Corey, who sat beside her, exuding calm confidence. Across the room, Ryder and Melissa occupied the opposing table, their expressions a mix of arrogance and irritation. It was the first time Rose had seen them together in such a formal setting, and the sight sent a sharp pang of determination through her chest. Corey leaned closer, her voice low but firm. Stay steady. This is where we shift the balance. Rose nodded, straightening her posture. She glanced briefly at Skye, seated a few rows behind her, his presence a quiet reassurance. Chloe had insisted on joining as well, her laptop perched on her knees as she prepared to manage any digital surprises that might arise. The judge entered, and the room stood before settling into an anticipatory silence. Proceedings began quickly, with Corey presenting the initial argument. Ryder and Melissa had acted in bad faith, attempting to sell the villa without Rose's consent and concealing financial transactions to benefit themselves. As Corey laid out the evidence, each point felt like a hammer striking a nail, methodical and deliberate. Ryder's attorney attempted to dismiss the accusations as baseless, arguing that Rose's claims lacked merit and that the villa was rightfully a marital asset. But when Corey presented the recorded conversation from the lounge, the courtroom shifted. The audio was crisp and damning, Melissa's voice unmistakably discussing the offshore accounts and expressing concern over Rose's ability to disrupt the sale. The room fell silent as the weight of the recording hung in the air. Ryder shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Melissa's face paled. For the first time, their carefully constructed facade showed cracks. Corey capitalized on the moment, her voice steady and commanding. The evidence is clear. Ryder and Melissa knowingly acted to undermine my client's legal rights, attempting to profit at her expense. This is not just unethical, it's illegal. As Corey returned to her seat, Rose felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for her friend's unwavering resolve. But the battle wasn't over yet. Ryder's attorney called him to the stand, and Rose's heart tightened as he approached the witness box, his usual charm firmly in place. Ryder began confidently, painting himself as a misunderstood husband trying to navigate a difficult marriage. He portrayed Rose as overly emotional, accusing her of lashing out without reason. The narrative was infuriating, but Corey's calm demeanor didn't waver. When it was her turn to cross-examine, Corey approached Ryder with a carefully controlled intensity. "Mr. Ryder," she began, her tone sharp but professional, "can you explain why financial transfers from your joint accounts lead directly to Melissa's real estate firm?" Ryder hesitated, the faintest flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Those were business-related," he said, his voice tight. "We discussed them as a couple." "Did you?" Corey asked, her eyebrow arching. "Because my client has provided sworn testimony that she was unaware of these transactions. Were you in fact making unilateral decisions with her finances?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Ryder's confidence faltered. Rose watched as the tension in his shoulders grew, a sign that the carefully constructed story was beginning to unravel. Corey's eyes narrowed, her sharp gaze fixed on Ryder as she pressed forward. "Let's talk specifics, Mr. Ryder. These business-related transactions, do they include payments for the services of a private moving company hired to clear out the villa without my client's knowledge?" The courtroom stirred with quiet murmurs as Ryder shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth to respond, but Corey didn't give him the chance. "We have receipts," she said, holding up a copy of an invoice clearly listing Ryder's name alongside the moving company's logo. "The payments were processed through Melissa's firm's account. Can you explain why my client's property was removed from her home without her consent?" Ryder's jaw tightened, his composure cracking under the pressure. "It was a misunderstanding," he said, his tone defensive. "I thought we had agreed." "Agreed?" Corey interrupted, her voice firm. "You thought your wife had agreed to have her belongings removed and her home prepared for sale without her knowledge. Does that sound reasonable to you, Mr. Ryder?" Ryder didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. Corey let the tension linger before turning her attention to the judge. "Your Honor, the pattern here is clear. Mr. Ryder and Ms. Melissa orchestrated a calculated effort to strip my client of her rights and property. They relied on deception, coercion, and misrepresentation at every step. Melissa's attorney Rose, attempting to redirect the narrative. Your Honor, this is conjecture. My client, Ms. Melissa Daniels, acted solely as a business intermediary. She had no knowledge of the financial intricacies or the personal disputes between Mr. Ryder and Ms. Rose." But Corey was ready. She stepped back to the plaintiff's table, pulling a document from the stack Chloe had helped compile. "If Ms. Daniels was merely an intermediary, why does this email, sent from her account to Mr. Jackson Harper, explicitly discuss fast-tracking the sale of the villa before legal challenges could arise?" She handed the document to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. "This correspondence not only confirms Ms. Daniels's involvement in the scheme, but also demonstrates her awareness of the unethical nature of their actions." Melissa's face turned a deep shade of red as the courtroom buzzed again. Ryder avoided looking in her direction, his focus fixed on the desk in front of him. For the first time, it was clear that their partnership was unraveling under the weight of the evidence. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing the attorneys to regroup. As the room emptied, Corey turned to Rose, her expression calm but triumphant. "We've got them," she said quietly. "Their defenses are crumbling. Now we just need to keep the pressure on." Rose nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and adrenaline. For months, she had felt powerless, but now as Ryder and Melissa's scheme fell apart piece by piece, she finally felt the tide turning in her favor. When the session resumed, it was Ryder's attorney's turn to cross-examine Rose. He tried to paint her as vindictive, claiming her actions were driven by personal bitterness rather than legitimate legal grievances. But Rose held her ground, answering each question with calm precision, her voice steady as she recounted the ways Ryder and Melissa had undermined her. By the time the proceedings adjourned for the day, Rose felt a cautious sense of victory. The evidence was overwhelming, and even the judge's carefully neutral demeanor couldn't conceal the impact of Corey's arguments. As they left the courtroom, Sky joined them outside, his expression quietly satisfied. "They're unraveling," he said simply. "It's only a matter of time." Rose took a deep breath, the crisp air filling her lungs. For the first time in months, she felt like she was on the verge of reclaiming her life. But she knew this wasn't over yet, not until Ryder and Melissa faced the full consequences of their actions. The air was heavy with tension as Rose and her team regrouped at Corey's house that evening. The victory in court earlier that day had been significant, but no one was under the illusion that Ryder and Melissa would back down quietly. Sky leaned against the kitchen counter, reviewing the footage and documents they had presented, while Chloe sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop open and fingers flying across the keyboard. "They're desperate now," Sky said, his tone measured but firm. "Ryder's arrogance took a hit today, but that just means he's more likely to lash out. Desperate people do stupid things." Corey nodded, pacing the room with her phone in hand. "We've thrown them off balance, but we need to keep the momentum. They're cornered and the judge knows it. The key now is to make sure they can't recover." Rose sat at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "What happens if they try something reckless?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "What if Ryder tries to sell the villa anyway, even after today?" Chloe glanced up from her laptop, her expression grim but confident. "He'd be a fool to try, but we're prepared. I've got alerts set up for any changes to the property's status. If they so much as think about filing fraudulent documents, we'll know." Sky crossed the room and placed a hand on the back of Rose's chair. "They're running out of options, Rose. That's why today was so important. You've shown them that you're not going to roll over and let them take what's yours. Now we make sure they know there's no way out." Corey's phone buzzed, drawing everyone's attention. She glanced at the screen, her expression sharpening as she read the message. "It's from a contact at the courthouse," she said, her tone clipped. "Ryder's attorney just filed a motion. Something about an emergency reassessment of the villa's ownership status." Rose's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means they're trying to force the sale through under the guise of a financial emergency," Corey explained, already gathering her bag and legal pads. "It's a long shot, but if they can convince the judge, it would put the property in limbo until the case is fully resolved. We need to counter this immediately." Sky grabbed his jacket, his movements quick and efficient. "Let's move. Chloe, stay here and keep monitoring the alerts. If anything else comes up, call me." Rose stood, her determination flaring to life again. "I'm coming with you." Corey hesitated but nodded. "All right, but let me handle the legal side. You just need to be there to remind Ryder and the judge that you're not backing down." The team moved with purpose, the weight of the situation hanging heavily over them. As they drove to the courthouse, Rose's mind raced with every possibility, every outcome. She had come too far to let Ryder win now, and she wasn't about to let him strip her of everything she'd fought to protect. The courthouse was dimly lit and mostly empty by the time they arrived, the late hour casting long shadows across the marble floors. Rose followed Corey and Sky through the quiet corridors, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stillness. Anxiety churned in her stomach, but she kept her head high, drawing strength from the presence of her allies. They entered the small hearing room where the emergency motion was being addressed. Ryder was already there, seated with his attorney at the opposing table. He glanced up as they entered, his expression carefully neutral, though Rose caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes. Melissa was conspicuously absent, a fact that didn't escape Rose's notice. She wondered if the cracks in their partnership were beginning to widen. The judge, a stern woman with piercing eyes and an air of quiet authority, addressed the room as they took their seats. "I trust everyone understands the urgency of this matter," she said, her voice steady. "Let's proceed." Ryder's attorney rose first, launching into an argument about financial strain, asset management, and the supposed necessity of liquidating the villa. He framed Ryder as a victim of unfortunate circumstances, painting a picture of a man simply trying to stabilize his life. Rose's jaw tightened at the blatant manipulation, but she kept her expression calm, just as Corey had advised. Beside her, Corey scribbled notes with practiced ease, her focus unshakable. When it was Corey's turn to speak, she stood with quiet confidence, her tone sharp and deliberate. "Your Honor, the petitioner's claims are not only misleading but entirely fabricated. We have presented substantial evidence of their bad faith actions in prior proceedings, including their attempts to sell the property without my client's consent. This motion is nothing more than an extension of that pattern." She handed a stack of documents to the bailiff, who delivered them to the judge. "Included here are communications between Mr. Ryder and third-party buyers, demonstrating his intent to circumvent legal processes entirely. This is not about financial hardship. It's about greed and deception." The judge studied the documents, her expression unreadable. As she flipped through the pages, Ryder's attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tide turning against them. Corey pressed on. "Furthermore, the petitioner has yet to address the funds transferred to offshore accounts under questionable circumstances. If financial strain were truly the issue, those assets would be accounted for and made accessible. Instead, they've been concealed." The judge looked up, her gaze sharp as it settled on Ryder. "Mr. Ryder," she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "can you explain these transactions?" Ryder hesitated, his usual smooth confidence faltering under the judge's scrutiny. "They were business investments," he said finally, his tone unconvincing. Corey didn't let the moment pass. "Business investments that coincidentally bypassed joint accounts and directly benefited Ms. Melissa Daniels. Your Honor, this pattern speaks for itself." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. The judge's expression hardened as she set the documents aside. "I'll be issuing a temporary hold on the property sale," she said firmly. "Until this case is resolved, the villa will remain in the plaintiff's name." Relief flooded through Rose, but she kept her composure as Corey returned to her seat, her expression calm but triumphant. Across the room, Ryder's frustration was evident, though he masked it poorly. He exchanged hurried words with his attorney, but it was clear they had been outmaneuvered. As the session adjourned, Skye leaned in close to Rose. "This isn't over, but it's a major win," he said quietly. "They're running out of moves." Rose nodded, the weight of the evening beginning to lift. For the first time, she felt the undeniable sense that justice was within reach. Ryder had tried to take everything from her, but piece by piece she was taking it back, and she wasn't finished yet. The villa seemed different as Rose stepped through its doors, a sense of quiet victory settling over her. The furniture was still gone, the walls bare, but the house no longer felt like a hollow shell. It felt like hers again, a place she could rebuild, not just physically but emotionally. The echoes of the past few weeks still lingered, but with each step forward, they grew quieter. Corey followed close behind, a folder of paperwork clutched in her hands. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice firm but encouraging. "The judge's ruling gives us a solid foundation, but Ryder and Melissa won't stop here. We need to stay ahead." Rose nodded, her resolve hardening. "I know. But for the first time I feel like I'm not just reacting. I'm ready to fight back." Skye entered behind them, his sharp eyes scanning the space. "Good," he said simply, his tone steady. "Because they're scrambling, Melissa's been making frantic calls all morning, and Ryder's accounts are under scrutiny now that the judge is looking into his offshore transfers. Any movement on the buyers? Corey asked, setting her folder on the kitchen counter. Harper's backing off, Skye replied. The legal mess spooked him, but Connors is still sniffing around. He's not afraid of controversy, and he's known for finding ways to exploit loopholes. Rose clenched her fists, the thought of another opportunist circling her home, igniting a fresh wave of determination. Then we make it clear to him and to anyone else that this isn't just a property. It's my home, and I'm not letting anyone take it. Chloe appeared in the doorway, her laptop balanced on one arm. Speaking of making things clear, she said with a sly smile, I've been working on something. She set the laptop on the counter, pulling up a series of emails and financial documents. This is everything we've got on Melissa. Payments from Ryder, her involvement in the property scam, and even some side deals she's been keeping from him. If we drop this in the right hands, her reputation will be toast. Skye raised an eyebrow. And what about Ryder? Chloe's grin widened. Oh, don't worry. I've got plenty on him too. But we need to be strategic. If we release everything at once, they'll just double down and play the victim. We need to apply pressure bit by bit, make them turn on each other. Corey nodded thoughtfully, a spark of approval in her eyes. Divide and conquer. It's risky, but if we play it right, it could be exactly what we need. Rose listened intently, the plan taking shape in her mind. She had been on the defensive for so long, but now, for the first time, she felt like she had the upper hand. Let's do it, she said firmly. Whatever it takes to end this, I'm in. The room fell into a flurry of activity as they began finalizing their strategy, each person focused and determined. For Rose, the villa was more than just a house. It was a symbol of her strength, her resilience, and she was ready to fight for it, no matter what came next. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the villa's large windows, highlighting the dust motes swirling in the air. Rose stood in the empty living room, letting her fingers brush lightly against the wall. This was the house her parents had poured their love into, the home that carried the memories of holidays, quiet evenings, and moments of joy. It wasn't just a piece of property, it was a legacy, a reminder of everything she had fought for. And now it was hers again. Corey's voice broke the quiet. Rose, you've done more than just hold your ground. You've turned the tide, but we need to stay sharp. Ryder and Melissa are desperate, and desperate people can be dangerous. Rose turned to her, the weight of the last few weeks evident in her eyes, but so was something stronger, determination. I'm not going to let them win, Corey. Not now, not ever. This house is mine, and they'll regret thinking they could take it from me. Chloe, seated cross-legged on the floor with her laptop, waved Rose over. You might like this, she said with a mischievous grin. Melissa's been busy trying to spin damage control. I've intercepted a few emails. She's reached out to Harper again, trying to convince him the legal trouble is minor and that Ryder's still got everything under control. Corey snorted. That's rich. Harper's no fool. He's probably already weighing the risks of being dragged into a fraud case. Exactly, Chloe said. But here's the kicker. Melissa doesn't know that Harper's pulling back. She's working overtime to patch holes Ryder hasn't even admitted are sinking them. Skye stepped in, his expression as calm and collected as always. This is our opening, he said. Melissa and Ryder are on different wavelengths now. They're not working as a unit anymore, which means they'll start making mistakes. Big ones. Rose crossed her arms, her mind spinning. What's the best way to push them further apart? Chloe clicked through a few files, pulling up a spreadsheet filled with numbers and names. Here, she said, pointing at the screen. These are the transactions Melissa has been hiding from Ryder, side payments from developers she's trying to keep for herself. If Ryder finds out about this, it'll be chaos. Corey leaned over, studying the screen. Revealing this to Ryder could make him question Melissa's loyalty. But it's a double-edged sword. If they realize we're behind it, they might double down on each other to fight back. Sky shook his head. No, they won't. Ryder's ego won't let him. If he feels betrayed, his first instinct will be to retaliate, not to cooperate. Rose absorbed their words, the pieces of the plan falling into place. So we leak it, she said, quietly, through a channel Ryder trusts. Something he can't trace back to us, but that he'll believe without question. Corey raised an eyebrow. You've been paying attention, she said with a small smile. That's exactly how we play this. Sky nodded. I'll handle the delivery. Chloe, you make sure the files look authentic but untraceable. Rose, you need to be ready. Once this blows up, they'll come after you harder than ever. I'm ready, Rose said firmly. Whatever they throw at me, I can handle it. As the team worked, the air in the villa shifted. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a war room, a place of planning and resilience. Rose felt the strength of the people around her. Corey's unshakable resolve, Sky's quiet confidence, Chloe's relentless resourcefulness. Together, they were more than a team. They were a force. That evening, as the final touches were put on the plan, Rose stood outside on the villa's balcony, the cool breeze brushing against her face. The stars above seemed brighter than they had in weeks, and for the first time she allowed herself a moment of peace. The fight wasn't over, but she had reclaimed her footing, her power, and her voice. Sky joined her on the balcony, his presence solid and grounding. You've come a long way, he said quietly. Rose glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I had to. They left me no choice. He nodded, his gaze distant. That's the thing about people like Ryder. They think they can break you, but they don't realize what happens when you push someone too far. Rose's smile grew stronger, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. I'm not broken, not anymore. Sky met her gaze, his expression softening. No, you're not, and that's what makes you dangerous to them. As the night deepened, Rose felt a quiet sense of triumph settle over her. The villa wasn't just a battleground, it was a symbol of everything she had overcome. And with her team by her side, she knew the final confrontation was coming. And she was ready for it. The day of the final court hearing arrived, and the weight of everything Rose had endured pressed down on her like never before. The villa, her family's legacy, and her own sense of identity were all on the line. The courtroom was packed, the tension thick in the air. Reporters filled the back rows, their notepads and cameras at the ready. The media attention had grown after the leaked details of Ryder and Melissa's schemes hit the public sphere, thanks to Chloe's carefully orchestrated efforts. Rose took her seat at the plaintiff's table, her chin held high, her resolve unshaken. Across the room, Ryder sat stiffly, his once confident demeanor replaced with a strained expression. Melissa was notably absent, her legal team citing an unavoidable emergency, but Rose knew better. The cracks in their alliance had widened into a chasm after the revelations about Melissa's hidden dealings. Ryder was now fighting alone, his polished exterior fraying under the weight of his actions. Corey leaned close to Rose, her voice calm but firm. This is it. We're going to close this out today. Rose nodded, her pulse steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Let's finish it. The judge entered, and the room rose before settling into an expectant silence. Corey began with a final presentation of their case, meticulously outlining Ryder's pattern of deception, the offshore accounts, and the fraudulent attempts to sell the villa. Every piece of evidence was methodically laid out, from the incriminating audio recordings to the financial transactions Chloe had uncovered. As Corey spoke, Rose watched Ryder, studying his reactions. His usual air of control had dissolved entirely, replaced with subtle but telling signs of panic, his clenched fists, his averted gaze. He shifted uncomfortably as Corey displayed an email exchange between him and Melissa, where they discussed expediting the sale to avoid legal challenges. The courtroom murmured, the damning words projected on a large screen for everyone to see. When Ryder was called to the stand, he tried to regain his composure, but his voice wavered as he answered the questions posed by Corey. She was relentless, her cross-examination cutting through his flimsy defenses with precision. "Mr. Ryder," she said, her tone icy but professional, "you claim to have acted in the best interest of your marital estate, yet every action you've taken has undermined your wife's legal rights. Do you honestly expect this court to believe your intentions were pure?" Ryder hesitated, his silence louder than any response he could have given. The judge's gaze sharpened, her patience clearly wearing thin. Corey continued, her voice rising slightly. "The evidence speaks for itself, Your Honor. My client has not only suffered emotional and financial harm, but has been forced to fight against calculated, premeditated actions designed to strip her of her rightful property. We ask that the court not only rule in her favor, but also impose appropriate sanctions to deter such egregious behavior." As Corey returned to her seat, Rose felt a surge of pride and gratitude for her friend's unwavering support. The courtroom fell silent as the judge began reviewing the final arguments, the tension palpable. Rose's eyes drifted to the villa's photographs displayed on the plaintiff's table, a reminder of what she was fighting for. Not just a house, but a life rebuilt on her own terms. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, pulling the courtroom into an even heavier silence. She removed her glasses, setting them on the bench, her gaze sweeping over the room. "I've reviewed the evidence and heard the testimonies," she began, her tone measured but firm. "What is clear beyond dispute is that Mr. Ryder acted in bad faith, knowingly and willfully attempting to deprive Mrs. Rose of her legal and equitable rights to the property in question. This court will not tolerate such blatant disregard for the law." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience, but the judge raised her hand, silencing them. She turned her attention to Rose, her expression softening slightly. "Mrs. Rose, your resilience in the face of these challenges is commendable. The court rules in your favor, granting you sole and undisputed ownership of the villa. Furthermore, due to the severity of Mr. Ryder's actions, punitive damages will be awarded to you, and all legal fees will be covered by the defendant." Rose's breath caught, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. The room blurred slightly as the weight she had been carrying for months began to lift. Corey placed a hand on her shoulder, a small, triumphant smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "We did it," she whispered. Across the room, Ryder's composure shattered. He slammed a hand on the table, drawing a sharp reprimand from the judge. His attorney leaned in, attempting to calm him, but the damage was done. Ryder had lost, publicly, decisively, and irrevocably. Rose stood as the judge adjourned the court, the sound of the gavel marking the end of a long and painful chapter. Reporters surged forward as she exited, but Skye and Corey flanked her, shielding her from the chaos. Outside, the cool breeze felt like a fresh start, carrying away the last vestiges of her fear and doubt. Later that evening, Rose returned to the villa with Skye and Corey, the house illuminated softly against the night sky. For the first time in months, she felt at peace. They stood together in the living room, the emptiness no longer a reminder of what had been lost, but a canvas for what could be rebuilt. Corey raised a glass of champagne she had brought along, her smile wide. "To Rose," she said, her voice full of warmth. "For fighting back, for reclaiming what's hers, and for proving that strength comes from within." Skye added, his tone quieter but no less heartfelt. And to a future where no one ever doubts her again. Rose smiled, her eyes glistening as she raised her glass. To all of us. I couldn't have done this alone. Thank you. They clinked glasses, the sound echoing gently in the empty room. As they sipped, Rose allowed herself to imagine the future. A life where the villa became more than just a home. She pictured it as a refuge for others who had been broken down but refused to stay defeated, just as she had. After Corey and Skye left, Rose stood on the balcony, looking out at the moonlit ocean. The villa, once a symbol of her pain and loss, now represented something far greater: resilience, hope, and the power to take back control of her life. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she was ready for them. The breeze carried with it a faint scent of salt and jasmine, and for the first time in months, Rose smiled, truly, deeply. She wasn't just standing, she was thriving. Her journey had been one of loss, betrayal, and heartbreak, but from those ashes she had risen stronger, like the phoenix she had always been meant to become. And this, she knew, was only the beginning.